late. I was lecturing in another room, so it was difficult to be rushed. But so I'm very pleased to have you here for this panel, which has been set up by the IMU on the future of publishing. I think it's understood in mathematics, but of course the future of publishing is of course a question which goes much beyond mathematics. We won't spend, I don't want to spend a long time to speak, because I want the other panelists to speak, and the 2 points I want to make. First, I want that very briefly each panelist introduce himself, because they are shown as panelists. The other side is the same? Or
yes.
Okay. So please, maybe we just go from right to left. So please give your name, your affiliation, and maybe if you have a special role with respect to publishing, you mention it.
Okay, I'm Ravi Vakil. I'm an algebraic geometer at Stanford University in the U.S. And I guess I'm here for, I'm a member of one of the IMU's 2 standing committees. I'm the Committee on Electronic Information and Communication. And I was the advisor to the group of graduate students that started Math Overflow, and I'm on the board of directors of the nonprofit behind it. And I'm also on the editorial board of a number of journals, including CEP's Gold Open Access Forum of Math.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jean-Pierre, professor at the University of Grenoble, a member of Academy of Sciences in Paris. I'm a complex geometer. I've been interested in math publication for a long time. I am still the editor-in-chief of Compte Rendu et Publications, among 3 other editors. I've been editing a number of journals. But this evening I'm here to present the EpiScience project. I guess in English you would say EpiSciences. So it's a project to create a worldwide platform for open access electronic journals in all fields of science. Of course, that includes mathematics. That's a very ambitious project that has started already a couple of months ago with a few journals in computer science and a few journals which will open in mathematics, and one journal who just arrived. So I will have the opportunity to explain that to you, I guess, in the next steps.
So my name is Thomas Hintermann. I'm the publisher of the European Mathematical Society. The publisher has been founded about 14 years ago. And meanwhile, we are publishing 20 journals, about 12 books a year. We are still operating on a very small basis, on a small human and financial resources, so we are self-supporting. We are not getting any financial support from outside, but are financed only through the income we generate from the sales of journals and books. And so although we're not for profit, when I'm asked how it is going, I usually say everything's okay, but the biggest worry is to get the money to get all this going. And I understand I will have the opportunity to talk more about this later on, so thank you.
Hi, I'm Nalini Joshi. I'm from the University of Sydney in Australia. I'm also the chair of the National Committee for Mathematical Sciences in Australia. I guess I'm here to give the upside-down view of publishing. Actually, I'm not quite sure why I'm here, except that I happen to be president of the Australian Mathematical Society when the Australian Research Council decided, in its wisdom, to start an exercise in journal rankings. And because the mathematicians made so much of a fuss, they decided to let us undertake that exercise. And that led to a ranked list of journals that they used once for one round, but which has been surprisingly long-lasting, not only in Australia, but I hear in other countries. So, for example, I can't go at any time this year in July, for example, I participated in a promotions committee. You can't go to a promotions committee, a selection committee, or any other sort of committee that looks at these kinds of issues without the candidates saying how many A-star journal publications they have, how many A journal publications they have, and so on. So it has had a very long tail of impact, that particular exercise. And right now, I guess I'm here in part because I was subsequently asked to chair a committee on journal ranking, which was a committee jointly with ICM and IMU. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please.
Thank you. My name is Greenwell. I'm the Publishing Director for Mathematical Sciences at Elsevier. I expect that will make me instantly unpopular with most of the room. I'm primarily here, I'm to get shot at, but at the invitation of the IMU. I thank them for inviting me. And I mean, for me, the issue really is to listen to what people have to say, to gain feedback on what people have to say about mathematical publishing, but also to help to work with the community to shape the future of mathematics publications.
Thank you.
My name is Rajendra, Bhatia, working at the Indian Statistical Institute in New Delhi. I have written 5 books published by 6 different publishers. I'm on the editorial boards of 3 journals and 2 book series, and I was the chief editor of the proceedings of the ICM2010.
Thank you very much. Myself, my name is Jean-Pierre Bourguignon. I'm a retired mathematician, quote unquote. I'm presently president of the European Research Council, which gives me an opportunity of being confronted with big differences existing in terms of publishing between different disciplines. And I could see how the ERC, which had been at some point extremely front-runner in terms of open access, is now suffering a lot from the regulations taken by the definition taken by the European Commission about open access, because it's very rigid, and of course it creates from one discipline to the other different attitudes. So my purpose, and I'm not going to talk more on the subject, is just to tell you how we agreed on organizing the discussion. I felt that since we have a reasonably long period to interact, it would be better to have really 3 sub-parts. Of course, they overlap, it's inevitable, so that at each time this gives an opportunity for not too long, but presentation or comments or contributions by the panelists. But at the end of each part, there will be time for the audience to ask questions or make comments. Again, if you make comments or ask questions, please introduce yourself, tell who you are, from where you come, and also be brief, because altogether I thought that already we are a bit late, by my fault. So having 3 times 30 minutes, which makes 1 hour and a half, and each panelist more or less given 3 minutes, 6 panelists 18 minutes, so it leaves 12 minutes to the audience to comment on each topic. So that was the general architecture. So my job is to make sure that this architecture doesn't fall apart completely, and that we still make some go forward enough in the allotted time to really have some conversation. So the 3 topics we agreed to talk about, which are not really topics, they are really approaches to the problem, are the following ones. So I give them a brief resume, and of course I'm sure the various panelists will interpret this resume slightly differently. That's part of the game. The first one is really to make sure, and that's partly connected to my own experience as president of the ERC, to make sure that we are really, as mathematicians, really considered, so there are so many different possible uses of the different forms of publishing that you must make sure that you really cover them all. So the way I formulated it was the use of the various forms of publishing by the mathematicians, journals, books, repositories, and even new forms to be invented. The second topic, or the second round, should be on the economic models that exist or are being developed. And of course, this has to do also with evaluating the cost of each of the models with different approaches, as you know. And and also for mathematicians, we all know that how much the consideration of long-term sustainability is very critical. And the last part, which should be the 3rd section, is the involvement of the mathematical community when it is confronted with these different models through individual initiatives or as well as through more collective initiatives. And of course, some even represented here. There are some academic publishers, there are commercial publishers, there are university publishing houses, there are also some people who try to have their own publishing system. So this is the key question. How can we collectively get things organized, and maybe with a complicated organization there are several possibilities of organizing ourselves. So these are the three moments. So we start with the first moment, which is really exploring the various forms of publishing. And for me, it was very important to start by this one, because I realized after some quite intense exchanges with some scientists from other disciplines, particularly biologists, that for them the meaning of publishing is absolutely not the same as for mathematicians, and what they consider as absolutely critical characteristics are completely different. I even had the biologists tell me, I absolutely need my paper to be published and accessible tomorrow, and I don't care whether it's readable in 5 months. And of course, for mathematicians, this doesn't make any sense, because basically, if you are interested in the subject, you can always get access to be prepared by the mathematician who has written it. But what you care about is having it properly evaluated and available in no time. So definitely there are different needs. So we start with this first round. So I don't mean to go necessarily right to left. So who wants to start? Ravi? Okay.
So I'd like to end my 3 minutes with an explicit proposal. So I should say I'm going to be boring and talk about journals as opposed to other means of publication. And maybe I should say the background, my attitude towards such questions is that this is I don't really think this is a crisis, because it's been ongoing for a very long time. And there's been a lot of talking and theorizing and utopian and talks of various utopian solutions. And I think it's now time to, I'm fairly bored of this, and I think it's time to start actually experimenting and trying things out, and trying many, many different things out, which is why I'm very pleased with the many different trial balloons that are going out there that should be supported. So now the proposal I want to make comes from the CEIC, the IMU committee, and the reason I'm saying it here is because the CEIC would like to see the reaction here, and the parts of the executive committee would see it as well, and then depending on the response, then the CEIC could propose something to the executive committee. It would then be the IMU's best practices proposal, which is on the webpage, which would enable individuals to approach publishers on this. So the proposal is this, and it's developed by and proposed by Henry Cohen at Microsoft Research, which is that in essence that we consider as best practices that publishers make journal articles 5 years or older permanently available and distributable. And the reason for this time is because this would not disrupt the financial model of publishers, and it does address, I think, many of the needs, not all of the mathematicians. It would mean articles older than 5 years would be Googleable, would be searchable in many different ways. So it's not a perfect solution, but it's a start, and would allow individuals to approach publishers to do this. And I believe, I'm not sure, but I believe Elsevier and the American Mathematical Society already do this. So the fact that it's so this is something which is potentially feasible. So I'd be curious, either in the question period or even privately afterwards, to hear people's opinions on this.
Jean-Pierre?
Well, there are many issues involved in publications. I will not discuss about books or pedagogical documents, because I think they are a completely different subject. I will concentrate on the issues related to publishing journals. Still, I believe that books in paper form and documents in paper form still have some time to live, because right now, of course, the e-books are not yet up to the task. But for publications of articles, it's a different matter. We've come to the situation where we mostly manage in electronic form, and if we have paper, we make scans very frequently. So I think it's a crucial issue that we deal with electronic documents, and a major problem, in my view, is indexation and access to information, because there is a growing mass of information. It's exploding, constantly increasing. Of course, most people expect that just clicking, for instance, on a list of references, you would get to other related papers and so on. And of course, a crucial condition for that is open access. You cannot achieve technology that will work if you don't have access to the data, if some papers are in completely closed servers that you have to pay for to get access to the papers. So I'm really in favor of a model which is green open access. Well, we'll discuss models later. But of course, I would like to emphasize that, in my view, the future will bring models where the scientific community can really navigate by very efficient tools. And one of them, of course, is Archive. This is the open access database of manuscripts. This tool already exists since more than 20 years now. We have to build on that. So the Episciences project I will discuss is essentially a layer above this fundamental database. I hope that indexation also will improve in that perspective. There have been other initiatives like Nundam, for instance, in Dufourier, my place, where they have scanned enormous amount of existing journals which were not in electronic form, but thanks to optical character recognition, full search in those papers is now possible. And of course, I would like a future where you have full search, full text search on all documents and fully interactive future. And one of the goals of Episciences will be to address this.
Thank you. Thomas?
So I understand this part of the discussion is about the use of the mathematical literature, and because I'm the publisher, I'm trying my best to put the tools at your disposal, but I'm not a research mathematician, so I think the ideas really have to come from you in this section, and unless I'm asked really specific question to a publisher, I'm happy to donate my speech in this section to the other panelists and to the podium.
Thank you. Nalini?
I guess all of us know about open access and various types of models. We know about the traditional ways of publishing. Perhaps some of us have experimented with the open source programs that are out there, like OJS, where you can even make your own journal. But I thought I'd bring up something that hasn't been mentioned yet, and maybe a long way into the future, and that's to do with the way mathematics seems to be progressing through collaborative enterprises. I don't know how that will link up with publishing in the sense that we're talking about now. Ravi mentioned Math Overflow. There are lots of discussions that go on such sites. There are polymath projects that you've also heard about. But there's also mathematics being shared through Facebook, Twitter, Google+, even LinkedIn sometimes has articles. And so there's a lot more communication mechanisms happening right now than we ever imagined was possible. Now, most of that is collaborative mechanisms. They're not publishing in the sense that we're talking about here, but the archive also started out being just a mechanism for posting what you have without there being the mechanisms of publishing on top of it, and now we're coming to that discussion right now. But without in any way taking away from what's been said already, I thought I should mention that as a long way into the future type of mechanism that one should also be thinking of.
Thank you. Please.
I mean, I'll start by saying, I'll try and keep this brief as well to give these people some time, but this is an entirely different community to others that I've worked with. I've been working on mathematical sciences now since the beginning of last year, and I worked with engineers and medical people prior to that, and the longevity of data, the longevity of information in mathematical sciences is far beyond what I saw in those fields. There's also differences in the way that you use information, the way you communicate. So archives have already been mentioned several times. And as with hard copy books, those have still been mentioned. We've sold quite a few books actually off the stand. But there are also some of the smaller community-supported journals, like the Electronic Journal of Combinatorics, which exist in this field that don't really exist in many other fields. Having said all that, I think from our point of view that the future is going to be a reasonably diverse one. I don't think that the current status quo is going to exist forever, and I think there are more and more ways of communication and more ways of sharing information coming into play. That has by itself, in the rise of the internet, led to some of the open access journals that people would rather not see in existence. And I'm sure somebody will mention those later, but you're back to really the main journals. What you want to see from them is validation, you want to see archiving, you want to see things that are there forever. And obviously, archive and electronic journals and things, you want to see those when you put something in there, you want it to be there forever. Somebody talked about methods of collaboration. Obviously, Elsevier sees that as an element of the publishing future. We bought the Mendeley platform fairly recently, and that's part of a collaborative future, obviously. But I think everybody has a role to play in how the future is shaped, both publishers and societies like the EMS and communities. I think, I can score a point on Ravi's notes that our open archive is actually 4 years, not 5. So we're already a year ahead of it.
Thank you.
I will supplement what has been said. A little bit about books. I think books are undergraduate, graduate, and research monographs. The first one, undergraduate, probably the market itself is taking care of it. If you don't write a good calculus book, nobody uses it, so authors are being forced to write good books. Graduate texts also by and large seem to be okay. It is the research monographs which share the same problems as those for journals, which in some sense are problems of our present technological society. Overproduction, goods which are cheap but not durable, consumer is confused whether to look this way or that. The same thing is happening in the journals. There are too many journals, too many conferences, too many panel discussions. So, too many speakers at conferences and their papers. So what are our motives for publication? Maybe to communicate some advances which we have made, but maybe more honest answer would be to get credit and some respect of colleagues. If our names were not on our papers, perhaps very few of us would write, maybe very few. Then there are demands on us from the profession that we should publish. And if you wonder why, maybe that's good because it keeps us fit, thinking about our subject, even though most people will not be contributing at the highest level of the subject, but it keeps them fit and into the subject. So maybe one can draw a parallel with tennis. To have one Pete Sampras or Federer, you need about 100 Wimbledon level players, and to have those you need 10,000 players playing at club level or a little higher level, and some who are just playing to keep fit. So something similar in mathematics. To have one Manjul or one Miriam, you need maybe 1,000 mathematicians practicing mathematics at that level. And to have those 1,000, maybe 10,000 other people doing mathematics. But now here is the problem where the parallel ends. If you have 10,000 people hitting the ball at random here and there, it will not serve the cause of tennis. And something similar in mathematics. I think there is proliferation of low quality publications. And that to me seems to be a major danger, especially with modern technology. You can produce them easily, circulate them easily, sell them easily. So is it possible to fix a baseline I do not know. Is it desirable? And if so, who decides how it is done? I would say here that what has been said, the journal is supposed to certify correctness, significance, readability, but it's not often done. Very major journals by top publishers, and some of them which are not recent entrants into the field, publish things for which the editors would be routinely failing their students in undergraduate classes. I have examples here, if somebody likes I could show. These are journals with major publishers, high impact and all that, but they start with a sentence for which a second-year student would be failed. Of course, the most egregious example is the recent fooling of the system by Sci-Gen. Perhaps people know about it. Somebody wrote a program which would generate papers which look respectable, sensible, but are utter rubbish. And they appeared in 120 such papers have recently been withdrawn by Springer and IEEE. Again, I could show you examples of such papers. So to me, that seems a very major issue to which we have to apply our mind. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think every panelist has expressed his view on this issue, on the use of the various forms of publishing power by mathematicians. So who wants to add something from the floor? So maybe we can open the discussion for some 10 minutes, so probably it means 5 or 6 people can speak on this issue. So please don't take this time to speak on other things I've presented. So, I see. Is there a microphone? Microphone here, please. Here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It seems to me that you have mentioned some uses or some of the things by...
Sorry,
you
say who you
Oh,
are.
last from Budapest. So I think there are several here, validation of the results, certification of the value, then correction of mistakes, then formatting and archiving, and you could add a few less important ones. You think, I mean, every science seems to me that some of these functions are splitting and might be done completely separately. For example, you upload your paper to the archive and it's disseminated. Everybody can read it, but it's not certified, it's not validated. So, you think that these functions will split? So somebody just some company gets money for validating and maybe quality certificate, giving quality certificates of some papers.
Thank you for the question concerning the splitting. So, Jean-Pierre, you want to?
Yes, so I've not yet explained exactly what is the e-sciences project. Maybe it's time now. So actually, right now, the access to the manuscript and the evaluation of the papers are split. But the goal of e-sciences is precisely to somehow join these activities in one unique platform. Right now, when you access a paper on archive, it's just a manuscript. Of course, you may know it has been published somewhere and checked. But the goal of e-sciences is to create hundreds, if not thousands, of editorial boards, which have each their own editorial policy, and they will take the submission on archive on the suggestion of authors, or they will address the authors if they want, and then they will evaluate and produce a referee report on each of those papers. They will be refereed just as for standard journals, and then the corrected papers will be returned to the archive. This will be using actually technically the French mirror of archive, which is located at the CCSD in Lyon, Centre pour la Communication Scientifique Directe. And the platform is hosted at Lyon. And so right now there are a number of journals just opening. The initiative that started last year, but first journals opened very recently in April. So I would like to take the opportunity to suggest all mathematicians interested, especially all of you, to think about creating editorial boards. This will be very easy because the platform has enormous functionality, it's completely open to the world, it's free to use, free for readers, free for authors. Of course there are costs, but we'll discuss later so I see personally a future where open archives like the archive and evaluation somehow are in symbiosis. And when you consult a paper on archive, you might have a chance to see that it's been refereed and checked, and you will have a chance to access the final version of the paper. So this is one of my vision.
Thank you. Other questions? There is a question there.
Yes, so,
Just a minute.
yeah, so a follow-up question to that. Sorry, I've been to Australia. I may be wrong. I think that mathematical science publishers try to do this on a smaller scale with geometry and topology and algebraic geometry and topology. And if my memory is correct, they were depositing papers back on the archive for some years and then they stopped. Do you know what went wrong there and how that might not go wrong with your project? I mean, now it's behind a paywall.
Of course, well, there are a very small number of open access journals right now. There are many ones of lower quality. Of course, we want to open high-profile journals. Of course, the goal is to have journals that address various levels of publications, but we want to start with high-profile because we want to give a very good idea of what it works. For mathematicians. I think the financial problems have prevented so far to have many more journals and Q experiment that started. But the CCSD Lyon is supported by two French agencies, CNRS and INRIA, which are both important agencies. They invest a lot of money in this project. This project is going to be supported for years. It relies on a basic infrastructure that has existed for at least 15 years now. So I think there is no financial problem in the short term. It will be if the initiative becomes extremely big, and of course the whole world uses it. So then there will be higher costs, and then all the institutions will be called to support that. But this is more longer-term future.
More questions? Please, over there. Maybe you come to the... Please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Guillermo Corvera from Spain. I want to comment on Ravi's proposal. I think that somehow it's a dream for mathematicians, no? That will be a moving wall of 5 years and then everything's open. But I'm always concerned with sustainability of the systems, because we need that whatever system of publication we devise or exists is sustainable in time. And I'm not absolutely sure that is sustainable. The AMS is a good example, but I don't know how AMS manages the budget between their different businesses. So maybe journals can be supported because other part of the business generates the profit, no idea. But I think I recall without details, precise details, that there was a quite interesting paper in the notices of the AMS from somebody from the London Math Society explaining their system, which is just opposite, no? They make free the first years, and then they know that the high use of that mathematicians do of journals is the long term, then they charge that. I prefer everything to be free, it's clear, but I think we have to be in favor of a system which is sustainable also. So
Do you want me to comment?
Yeah, please.
Or like Bhatia Ravi wants to comment.
So just a quick follow-up question. I think this is absolutely essential that it has to be sustainable. And I think okay, that's a good question, and I think we'll soon get a possible answer. The journals, I can see why the LMS, being a mathematical society, realizes how mathematicians use journals. But if they were behind a paywall for the first 5 years, then of course, again, everything would be free. But if they were behind, but then libraries would still subscribe in order to get, so money would still, ideally the same amount of money would be flowing to the publisher. So that's a whole separate issue about that, but at least the financial model ideally shouldn't be broken. But I think the right people to hear from are.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we kind of did our sums when we opened up our archive with the 4-year window, and we worked. A lot of our costs at the moment are in hosting and archiving, and with lots of servers and multiple backups and all sorts of things. But we worked out that our 4-year window was going to be sustainable under the current model that we operate in.
Thank you. Sergey,
I just want to confirm that
get the
there's a
microphone.
publisher
Get
of the American
get the
Mathematical. Sorry. Sergey Gelfand, the publisher of the American Mathematical Society, and I should say that we did not notice that the moving wall model made major effect, noticeable financial effect on our journals. So I think because journals are mainly, at least so far, being sold by subscription to the libraries cannot wait 5 years until the article becomes free. Of course, if there are other models that you sell separate articles, in that case, probably moving forward, it's probably less compatible with moving forward, but our practice shows that it does not hurt, it probably hurts some, but not much, the financial aspect.
Thank you. I think we need to move on. Sorry for that. I think we had the... So the second topic, which we agreed to deal with now, is talking about the economic models that exist or are being developed, in particular how the various costs are evaluated and of course covered, and how they come into and make the models, economic models which are proposed still sustainable. So who wants to start? Maybe we start from the other way around?
Okay. So I had mentioned that there are some characteristics of the modern production which are the same for publishing. Same thing, there are some characteristics of the modern economy. Number one, whatever is good for corporations is good for all of us. That's an assumption. There are lots of acquisitions, mergers, formation of conglomerates, monopolies, etc. But there are some things peculiar in publishing which puzzle us. So number one, there doesn't seem to be any correlation between quality and price, which is quite different from whatever else we purchase. So for example, I'll tell you that around 1980, that's when I joined doing research, there were 3 kinds of journals. So the low-priced ones would be the ones which come from a society, university, like AMS or Annals of Mathematics coming from a university. Then there were reasonably priced journals, and essentially 2 major publishers there, Academic Press and Springer. This was true for both their books and journals. Then there were unreasonably priced ones, Elsevier, sorry.
That's all right. I expected that.
Marcel Decker, Kluwer, Gordon and Breach. Probably their quality was the lowest and their prices were the highest. Now I don't know any reason. How did they survive? I think this is where we have to introspect. All researchers, all libraries would like to have everything. You know, the bigger the library, the more famous the university, more of everything. Second thing which is puzzling is that advances in technology do not seem to lower prices, as is happening in other industries. So now typesetting, copy editing, printing, mailing, all those costs have changed, but the cost of journals doesn't seem to have been affected at all. Now compare this with prices of cell phones or clothes, which have come down after technology is improved. Third thing, much of the labor in this industry is free. Authors, referees, editors, all work for free. Fourth point is that these companies seem to have been totally insensitive to the demands of their consumers, of their free workers. So, for example, the editorial boards of many journals which resigned after, they did so after very prolonged efforts to engage with the publishers. So, the first time I became aware of this in 2003, Donald Knuth, who had founded one of the famous journals of algorithms, which was originally with the academic press, and then went on to Elsevier, he tried to talk to them over at least 2 or 3 years without any success. Then the acquisitions do not necessarily seem to improve the brand image. Again, you know, Elsevier brand, Elsevier standards seem to have gone up a little bit after they acquired academic press. Springer seems to have gone down because they seem to be acquiring everything. So I can understand that they would like to acquire the Acta Mathematica, but wherever they see an Acta, they want to take that over. And why? That's not clear. Maybe to make bigger bundles, you know. So that is something which is quite different in this industry. So these are my concerns. Essentially now we have 2 major players with a few smaller ones. And historically monopolies have always been bad. Exploitative, ruthless, unethical, whatever we want to say. And we seem to be going towards where we have very little choice but to accept big package. I want to buy 1 shirt, but I'm forced to buy 10 and with socks and everything put together. The pricing is very opaque. That's another cause for concern. So around 1990, every journal would give you its list price. And what we were often coming from poorer countries arguing with them was that, look here, you know, in India, for example, only 5 copies of your journal are being subscribed to. Maybe we don't want it free, but give it to us at lower price. You will gain something because more copies will be sold. The price would be higher than your cost price. But this almost always failed, with one exception. I think this is the first time when a sort of consortium idea was tried, and this was with the mathematical reviews. To mathematical reviews, we in India guaranteed that right now there are, let's say, 20 subscribers. They will continue, and maybe each would have 5 add-ons who will be charged less. Now what is happening, no one knows. It has been argued somewhere, I have articles here, which say that this opaque pricing may be good. So for example, Elsevier was charging University of Montana about 40% of what it was charging the University of Michigan for the same bundle. And this writer comments, so a notorious capitalist was practicing socialist policies. That's the comment. But I would be happy if the publisher's actions were more convincing. So for example, to get this information, Elsevier sued the University of Michigan or some other university, because now the way it works is that you make a bundle, you negotiate a price which you are not supposed to reveal to anybody else. So here is some data which I collected. It seems that the cost to society of each article from major publishers is approximately $5,000 cost per article. So that is calculated by taking all your articles which you have published and dividing that, the total money which the publisher is making on journals with that. And the cost of putting 1 article on the archive is $10. So what is going on, I do not understand. I wish somebody could explain to me. Here is some data on pricing. Annals of Mathematics, 13 cents per page. Acta Mathematica, 65 cents per page. That was before acquisition by Springer. I don't know what the current figure would be. Invention is $1.21 per page. And Elsevier average was $1.30 per page. And this writer who wrote about this was making the points annals, acta, inventions are perceived to be high quality. And I'm coming back to my point that there is no correlation between quality and pricing. Open access charges per paper. Springer right now seems to be charging $2,000 per paper. Elsevier usually $1,500, so the range is bigger. Now here is something which puzzles me. We say university presses would be better. Cambridge University Press recently announced 2 open access journals, Forum of Mathematics, I think, Pi and Sigma. and they are charging $750 per paper. At the same time, Cambridge University Press, for Compositio Mathematica, which they acquired from some other publisher, they are charging $2,000 for composition, as opposed to $750 for Forum of Mathematics. So I am now puzzled whether Elsevier is really doing something worse compared to others, including the university presses. The profits data is Elsevier makes 36%, Springer 33%, and Wiley 42%. So again, to please him, I would say why Elsevier is then being singled out is not very clear to me. Thanks.
Thank you. Go on.
Well, that's tough to follow. Right. I mean, from my point of view, there's quite a lot of numbers being put out there. I would recommend that people, some of those numbers came from the Bergstrom article, which is in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and I would recommend that people read that article if they want to understand the current business model and the way that bundling works. It's actually a fairly well thought out piece. It also gives a lot of numbers that show that Elsevier is one of the cheaper commercial publishers in terms of price per article and things like that. But I would advise you to read that article. I'm not going to go into it here. For us, really, it comes down to what is going to be sustainable in the future is going to be the key to our business model. As I already mentioned in answer to a question, much of our costing is in hosting and archiving now. Science Direct, since we're talking about all of Elsevier rather than just maths, Science Direct is up to about 12.6 million articles now on Science Direct, and we add to that by about 350,000 every year. I think Archive adds about 2,000 maths articles every month, so I mean, we add about 10,000 maths articles every year to our database, so it's a similar size to Archive in terms of maths. I mentioned that our Mathematics Open Archive is sustainable as we currently stand. Obviously, as the archive gets bigger, the hosting cost goes up, but at the moment it's sustainable. We found that we looked at Gold Open Access, we looked at the possibility of launching a Gold Open Access journal in maths. It seems to be de rigueur these days to launch one, but we decided that that wasn't particularly sustainable. There just isn't the level of funding or the level of interest from the community in having such an option. Our open access prices for our regular journals, for our hybrid journals, those are mostly taken up by funding bodies. We publish about 50, 60 open access articles in an average year. Most of those are funded by various funding bodies rather than by individuals. And our prices are somewhere between, I think the cheapest ones are about $750 US, and they go up to about 2,200, I think, in maths. So the business model is understood, it's been discussed at length. I work in the journal side of the business, not the book side of the business. I have worked on books in the past, so I understand how that business model works as well. But I mean, as I say, I mean, in terms of our individual maths list prices, you can find all those on the maths pages of elsevier.com. We list all our maths list prices every year. We also list how much those maths prices have increased or decreased by. So if you want to buy the journals individually, you can see how much they cost. Obviously, the bundling is a different matter, but I'd urge you to read the Bergstrom article on that.
Thank you. Nalini?
Thank you. Rajendra was so comprehensive. I don't think I have anything to add to what Rajendra said. It was so good, so comprehensive. But perhaps I could just add a little bit by asking you, the audience, whether you have published or tried to publish, submitted to an open access journal, or whether you would. So let me first ask you, how many of you have submitted a paper to an open access journal?
So what you mean by open access is really
Not the
green open access.
Yes.
You know that
green
shorthand
access.
expression
So
tend to cover several
there's
things.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So about 13.
Ravi.
Sorry, 14. A room of about maybe 50 people.
More.
60.
80.
This room holds 262.
Yes, but there's lots of gaps.
Yeah, I know, yes.
Okay, and does it make a difference to you what the cost of the open access charge is? So we've just heard about a range of prices, $2,000 for one of the hybrid models, maybe $750 for the Cambridge University Press, and possibly Elsevier has also a model of that kind. Would that make you attracted to submitting more often to such journals if the price was lower? So how many of you would submit if the price was, say, $750? No, people are not sure. If for any price at all, is it the price that's stopping you submitting? The author pays? No.
No, it's not the problem. How can I get from a lecturer to a full professor, and from a full professor to a first-class professor? Publishing in top-ranking journals. And what is a top-ranking journal? It's a journal with market price is top. This is a problem. Because in open access, you have who will refer the papers, who will pay, this is complicated. Publishing requires an army of technician people. If you want an image, you have to pay for an image.
Okay.
Let's move on.
Yes.
Yeah.
We'll move on and then we'll come back to more comments. Thank you.
Okay,
Thomas?
since
Was
it's
it
about
about,
sustainable models, I would first answer to that point. We are still selling journals largely through subscriptions, single or in packages, and to individual customers, or also through consortia. I don't have an overview, and probably nobody really has, of all the models that have been proposed in the meantime, and even gold access is not gold access. There are various forms of that and various forms of pre-open access. But I have to say, from my perspective, which is of course limited, I have not seen a really convincing alternative for the model we have now. In particular, gold open access for me, be it hybrid model or for dedicated journals to open access, gold open access, have, in my view, serious flaws and serious issues that have not been really addressed satisfactorily, in my view. Also, I mean, as has been said before, so far there has been no pressure whatsoever from the community. I had one single informal question, but I did not have one single serious request from any author in all these years for any of our journals where we would be publishing the journal in author-paid model. So we don't see any reason right now to engage in gold open access, and we will only do so if we are forced, which might be the case by politics rather than by need from the community. Also, which might be surprising to you coming from society publisher, I'm not advocating in general free access, because what we give free has to be brought in somewhere else. Somebody has to finance that. And I have also not seen some convincing model for that. What I'm advocating is affordable access. And I don't think there is generally, I mean, it looks like now everybody has already written off a subscription model. I don't think there's fundamentally anything wrong with the system. I can say that pricing has gone out of hand and costs also have gone wild. I can see that. But I don't think this is to blame on the system. Every payment system eventually will be under attack by those who can. That's pretty clear to me. What has not worked here is the market. And in part, I mean, maybe it's not the full answer, but partially this is because we are not operating in a consumer market. You don't have a product where you can say, oh, I'll take this, but it's, you can have a similar product cheaper there, so we take that. We are providing scientific information to the community, and it's my belief this should not be in the hands of people that have commercial interests primarily, So my answer to almost all questions or problems we will have about cost of publishing or sustainable models is not-for-profit publishing. So when you're dealing with a not-for-profit publisher, particularly society publisher, you can be sure whatever you pay, whatever money goes into it, goes back to the community in one form or other. Usually it will be used for publications, again, support maybe publications that are not viable by themselves, so there's some cross-financing, and also might be used in some cases for the purposes of the society or the institution that's behind this publisher. So for me, that's very important, that mathematical societies perform an important role for the community, and also they can play, and already are playing an important role for publication. It should be rather in their hands than in the hands of progressively commercial publishing. That's my view. That's my vote on sustainable models. But I would also, if you allow me to say one or two things to opinions that have been voiced about that labor in publishing is essentially free, and I would say this is far from the truth. And it goes too far now to explain everything that a publisher does, but if I'm asked, I would be very happy to give answer to that. But in general, just one indication about pricing, how that is related to the product. One thing I would like to say is, and it is hard to understand from the outside, most people just think of the costs that are related to a particular product. But when you are running a publisher, even not for profit, you need to build up a substantial organization. Even before you start publishing the first article, you need to do a lot of things. You need to have a legal structure. You need to have meetings of a board and so on. So you already have to do a lot of things, a lot of organization behind all this. And every product that is published has not only to bring in the costs that are directly related to this product, but a fair share to the more general costs, the overheads, we call them, and you can't really put them away. I mean, you may be able to hide them, but they are there, and they have to be taken into consideration. My answer is only that this should be minimal. Costs should be as high as they have to be under circumstances. So not-for-profit is my answer to almost all of these questions. That was what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Jean-Pierre.
So a lot of information has already been given, costs, various constraints. So I would like to give you a new light on this. So in my place, the cost of buying journals is of the order of magnitude of $100,000 or euros. If you multiply by the number of universities and institutions in the world, which counts in thousands, it's an enormous amount of money. So given modern technology and the fact that most mathematicians do refereeing work for free, that the cost of communication using electronic means is very small. One can easily conclude that this is really a misuse of money to spend so much money for the unique purpose of evaluating research, based on the fact that this evaluation is made anyway, in most cases, free by companies. So as Pierre rightly pointed out, the main question is trusting the evaluation and exploiting the evaluation for the sake of your own career and your progress as an academic worker. So I think these issues can be addressed. So first, the question of the standing of open access journals can be easily mitigated by having editorial boards that, of course, include experts in their respective fields. So to start in a good condition for the AP Sciences project, I hope there will be other projects of similar nature. So we have already 4 field medals who have entered the committee. Also the president of the present IMU who was here and is in the committee. Also members of the CEIC, and we want to create the first journal to be very high profile, to give just a very good first impetus. Okay, so that's one point, that open access doesn't mean low quality. I mean, it's only a point of having the right experts at the right place. So this can be addressed. Second, about the cost. So I've explained that the cost right now counts in hundreds of millions of dollars of equipment all over the world. Okay, but now look, if now I'm going to be extremely optimistic and utopian, I imagine that AP Sciences will be successful and will take a very substantial part of the papers in the world, so I'm expecting that it will join. Then what are the costs? Well, the team is a team of about, say, 12 to 15 people, including 7 or 8 computer experts. So you have to pay their salaries. Of course, you need secretaries here and there to administrate the journals. You have to pay for the computer equipment. You have to pay for the bandwidth of computer access and so on. So you have to add up everything. So it still counts a substantial amount of money. But of course, the secretaries anyway already function right now and serve many different journals. And you have enormous extra costs due to the fact that the system is not uniform. But AP Sciences precisely will provide a unified platform with a completely uniform technology, will create automatically websites for the journals, so you don't have to redo that work that presently is done at each individual situation. Is of course inherited from the past. So in the long term, there will be such a strong impetus to do these things and to save on money, actually, because this is not sustainable in the long term. I mean, France is maybe almost bankrupt country, but there are many countries in the world which cannot afford. I mean, look at all these developing countries that simply cannot buy the journals. So in the long run, I really believe they will succeed because this is the only way to go. The technique allows this. We already have the archive that is working very well. So it's only a matter of exploiting the archive and building an additional layer. Then the cost will be essentially the cost of a small team of 15 to 20 people. And then the cost of managing secretaries here and there to support the activity of journals. So this will be incredibly cheaper than the current models. Of course, it will take a lot of time to reach that point. So it was a very utopian view, but I think since the economy makes this possible and the technique makes this possible, in the long run we will reach this situation.
Thank you.
So I have not much to add, so I'll just say a few things. One is that the community for a long time has not done a great deal to advance. We've complained about a lot of things, but not done a lot of things. Now things are actually being done. So the question is how to get more and more people to vote with their feet to, in whatever way. Start an Epicence journal, start their own journal. There's been a lot of talk about about evaluating articles in some social media type of way where people comment, but no one's actually made a system that actually works, although I've seen some mock-ups. People should actually do things and then get other people to participate. Also, one serious problem which is not yet completely figured out is finding some new way of evaluating research. If there's some way beyond having stable journals with reputations, that people who don't know, who aren't going to look at who's on the editorial board in that year will be able to evaluate, because some evaluation is necessary. Something needs to be figured out, and in particular, how can we drive a stake through the heart of predatory journals? There's discovered journal rankings, but we do want to say that, as we pointed out, some journals really are worse than nothing. And my very last question, or partially a mischief, perhaps, is with Elsevier, the main cost is archiving. A major cost is archiving. I wonder whether some agreement can be worked out with the archive, where instead all of Elsevier's old articles can be posted on the archive, and then that cost will be somehow offloaded onto from Elsevier to the community.
Thank you. Some questions? Please, you missed your microphone is coming. Present you and be brief, please.
I'm Ravi from Common College, United States, but I'm here also to share with you some perspectives on the open access side, on another version of open access. So I wanted to say one thing, one comment about professional societies and two possible different models that I think you haven't really covered. One of them is that right before ICM, I was at MathFest, which is the Mathematical Association of America's summer meeting, and there was a meeting, there was another panel like this one. Actually, that one was specifically on open access, and open access publishing in mathematical sciences. And there was conversation about economical models, and it came up that the professional societies, most of them, at least the ones that were present there, the Mathematical Association of America specifically, admitted that basically their main income flow is publications. Now, I think most of us do not want our societies to suffer. We actually benefit from belonging to professional societies, and we want to find ways that can make things work still. But perhaps business models might still be changed, and there might be new business models that one might consider. One idea, and maybe things will have to change a lot drastically, maybe go leaner. I don't know, maybe business words there, but it's not very pleasant for people. But consider the music industry. What happened to the music industry? Nobody I know, maybe you do know those people, actually purchases a full issue of a journal for their own sake, right? They just actually need one single paper from a journal every now and then. So you go to Science Direct or Springer Link, and if your library does not have access, then these individual items are like $39 or something like that. $39 per like 100 papers that you want to read is a lot for an individual researcher, but maybe if they're like 10 cents, or if they're maybe $1, 99 cents. iTunes Music is actually a lot. Music has changed a lot, and that could be a scary model, but also a possible thing to consider. Another model I wanted to mention is one that I'm actually working with, which is kind of similar to Episciences. I'm very delighted to hear about Episciences, though this one involves an institutional library as opposed to an external publishing organization. Your librarians are hurting as well. These journals cost an immense amount of money, and libraries are one of the first places that budgets are cut in the universities and colleges across the world. And the richest libraries, they still probably will be able to sustain the current system. As you have said, the current system is sustainable so far, but libraries' budgets are being cut continuously, year after year after year, and that sustainability may not continue in the future. So the libraries actually really are excited about the library-oriented publishing direction, and so the library publishes. So library becomes a publisher as well as the archiver of research, and they're already being paid because they're librarians, and libraries can work together with scholars who are the editors or authors and writers and so on. And this model can be promising for certain journals. I'm working with a journal, Journal of Humanistic Mathematics, which is an interdisciplinary journal. It publishes mathematics related to humanistic disciplines or philosophy, education, history related to mathematics. And it's basically open access works for us because we want to be open. But for most journals, maybe this will not work. But some journals, some people might find their librarians very willing to help. Thank you.
Over there, and that will be the last question for this. We're already late.
Well, it's still concerning the question of cost. We are still in the Marie Farge from Economy Superior about cost. There are several costs that I have not heard about and which they should be taken into account also. When you negotiate, when there are the consortium, I discovered that in France, the consortium, there are 60 people paid full-time at high level. There are conservateurs en chef, les bibliothèques, blah, blah, blah. This cost is a huge cost. Another thing about the variety of cost. We should compute seriously how much time each of us is spending on peer reviewing, spending on being an associate editor or editor. These are the costs. We have a salary and it's taken on our salary. Those costs should be made known. Another kind of costs which are hidden, and I want to know them. I know that publisher, not say only Elsevier, publisher, let's say even commercial publisher, they pay some of the editors. And unfortunately, the other editors, members of the same editorial board, they don't know. This should be an open cost. When you're a member of an editorial board, we should have an accounting clear about the work we are doing and who is paid what for what service. The very last cost, as you know, of course, which is still hidden, is the fact that when the contracts are negotiated by our librarians, consortia, the contract is secret. And you know, there is this movement since Bergstrom long ago. I mean, Bergstrom has been trying to open the cost for the last more than 10 years. This cost should be open just in order we know the overall business model in which our publication system is working. So, including the cost we spend, our salary, including your cost, we should play open on both sides of the system.
Thank you.
No, the question is, are you ready to do that? To open your cost?
You want to answer?
Yeah, do you want me to? Well, yeah. I think, I mean, obviously we've seen a lot of numbers revealed recently from both Professor Gower's efforts and through the Bergstrom articles. I think that that is something that will happen perhaps more and more, that people want to know how much things are costing. And how much individual consortia are paying. The original argument about keeping those contracts secret was because certain universities managed to negotiate better deals than certain other universities, and they didn't want to advertise that fact, but that's as may be. But I think we are now in a position where those numbers, a lot of those numbers are out in the open, and when the contract negotiations come around again, it's likely that those universities that are paying more may well negotiate harder. I mean, I can't speak for those particular universities. I'm glad that you mentioned editor costs, because obviously that's one thing that hasn't been mentioned, and also it does pay its editors. We sometimes also pay associate editors on journals. It is quite a substantial cost for us, and it doesn't necessarily go all the way to recompensing editors for the time they spend, the great time they spend in some cases working on their journals, but it's a recognition.
So sorry, you mean the managing editors?
Yeah, editors-in-chief. Right. Yeah, I'm talking about editors-in-chief in that. So scientists who are working at a university who aren't Elsevier employees.
Yeah, how to know these costs? Where is published? How to get those figures?
Well, I mean, we don't make how much editors-in-chief get paid. I mean, we don't generally make that available, mostly because the individual editors probably don't want their colleagues to know, rather than...
in terms of behavior within the community?
Well, unfair is, yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on the individual editors. I mean, if editors wanted to tell their colleagues how much they were paid, there's nothing, you know, in an editor contract contract that would stop them telling their colleagues how much they were being paid for a journal. But I'll be honest and say that most of them probably wouldn't want to tell you. I mean, that's... Yeah, I mean, it averages out at about $100 per paper handled is the average for all the Elsevier in terms of what we pay editors. So that's a reasonably big number, but it's even at that, it varies quite widely across the individual editors.
Okay, do we close this point, which I think was an important one because it showed that not everything is really on the table, and even having a consistent description of the cost and seeing whether some new approaches are going to be comparable in terms of cost is not so completely trivial to do. Nevertheless, I think this issue needed to be addressed. So now the last point was how, as a community and in its diversity, that is having institutions, having learned societies, having IMU, or having individual people taking initiatives, how can we play a role in this? And actually, I would like to insist on the fact that considering the question of publishing for mathematicians cannot be detached from the question of publishing for other fields, because the policymakers, they don't consider subdomains. And since I think it was pretty clear from the beginning that our practices, our needs are quite different from some other disciplines, there will be some positions, if we don't do anything, taken across the board, and then we will be caught in a difficult situation. So in a typical example is the fact that some institutions, but also European Commission is one of them, that any project which is supported by the European Commission now has to be given, that's obligatory, open access. And the definition of open access, of course, is very important because it depends whether you want access, what delay you allow in the day of publication and the day of access. And clearly, I see this for the ERC very clearly, that for the biologists, the difference in time should be zero. That is, the first day a paper is published, it should be all accessible in open access. And then, of course, publishers say the answer is golden. You pay for publication, it's like an advertisement. But for mathematicians, this idea of having zero time for open access, as the IMU actually took a recommendation on this, is not really critical. Because actually, if you are in the field, you will have access to the data because the author is going to give you or it could be a version will be an archive and they can work on it. So you see, clearly, I think we have to be careful that in the position we defend, at some point, we will have to take care of the other ones. And how can we make sure that our needs are really what the way we want publishing for mathematics function? How can we make sure that this will be taken on board when they will have enforceable discussions? And I think this is not an easy problem. So that would like this to be the last point that we should discuss, which is not the point. It's really taking a broader perspective on how we insert our needs and the reality of situations and the various business models with what's happening in many different areas. So we start again with the.
So I'll be somewhat brief. There are many things we would like from publishers. I have a question for, well, a rhetorical question for you. It turns out that many of the things we would like, we can actually get. And so there are things we could do that for some reason the community has a hard time disseminating and has a hard time following en masse. So I'll say a couple of things from the CEIC's perspective. One is that author rights, there are many of the things we want. You could, even if they're not in standard contracts, most of the series publishers are very happy to give them if you just ask. And so people knew what they were and knew who they could ask, then this would be fairly trivial. So there's links from the CEIC webpage, but I guess people don't read it as often as the New York Times, and perhaps rightfully so. But there's some way to get the community to just automatically think about these issues. The second is that there are easy ways to find out whether the journal you're submitting to is good or evil, or where it is on the spectrum between good and evil. Sherpa or Romeo, there are ways of seeing what are the best practices different journals and publishers follow. Again, trivial, one mouse click away. How do we get ourselves and our colleagues to just automatically use them for making decisions rather than to just even take them into account?
you. Jean-Pierre?
Okay, there are clearly a lot of political issues around these questions. I'd like to discuss at least two. So first, of course, the question of open access is intimately related to evaluation of research and the use of impact factors. I'm very happy that the IMU will probably take a stand against the abuse of biometrics in evaluating the work of researchers. And actually, in many countries all over the world, there are probably not enough expertise available, and the administrators there or administration finds it easier just to count the number of pages or to add the impact factors of journals. And of course, this doesn't make sense on a scientific ground. And of course, it's very much against the vision that I have developed, because, of course, impact factors are mostly published by commercial companies, are not necessarily freely available, and so on. And anyway, the impact factors do not make sense. So I'm very happy that the IMU gave a statement about that. So this is one crucial political issue. This doesn't make sense for mathematics, and mathematicians should really explain to the other disciplines that for mathematics this is not to be used. Okay, a second political issue, of course, in the vision I developed, is to obtain support from the national governments on such initiatives to support open access journals. So right now in Europe, I think there is a strong support from the various governments. This has been repeated several times by various European instances, and French government especially. For the work of CCSD in particular, I have no doubts that they will continue working for at least several decades. In the long run, of course, if initiatives like KP Sciences become very big, the cost will increase, that's clear. There will be need for support from the institutions. But my view is that if this really works, it will become so indispensable that anyway, various institutions, various mathematical societies will be ready to share a little bit of their money to support a tool that will become necessary. So I don't see any real obstacle there, because the cost will be tremendously larger than it is now. So I don't, well, maybe I'm optimistic, but I don't see that as a real political problem. The more serious one, in my view, is rather the question of having a suitable evaluation of research, and this really should be kept in the hands of experts, not in the hands of administrators and people just counting numbers.
Thank you. Let me just make one correction. It's not correct when you say that European governments have been for open access. I mean, when the British government has open access, it's explicitly for all open access and nothing else. The same with the Dutch government. So it's a mixture of things.
Maybe a number.
I can tell you.
Not all.
I've been confronted with this, and very explicitly. So you have to be careful that quite often open access is used as a short version of the called open access, which is of course scandalous, but that's a fact. So, Thomas.
What I understand, this is not about a political issue as such, but how mathematicians can themselves make heard and get influence over the decisions made higher up. And of course, again, this is rather up to the mathematicians and probably not so much the publishers. But we iterate that the societies, I think, play a very important role there. And I'm not fully informed about everything the European Math Society does, and I expect the AMS also and European Math Societies, they have committees that specifically are in contact with the political bodies that are available and accessible to them. And so through these societies, I think it's one of the most natural ways
mathematicians can get influence on political decisions.
Thank you. Nalini?
Thanks. It seems to me that we've been talking about several different things at once. We've been talking about validating, making sure that validated research that's original is properly communicated, made accessible to the wider world of mathematicians. We've also been talking about evaluating. Perhaps we haven't talked much about the predatory journals. Ravi mentioned it briefly. We haven't been talking about the plethora of new journals that keep coming into our email inboxes all the time with demands for our involvement. So I think there are several different directions in this conversation, and quite a lot of the actions that have been followed recently, and I'm also signed up for the boycott of Elsevier several years ago, are based on seeing our community as victims. We're victims of decisions made by big corporate bodies, or we're victims of other sciences deciding to evaluate us in terms of bibliometrics, or we're victims of the fact that mathematicians are not funded as well as other areas and therefore can't afford certain things. But I think it's time to turn that around and think about how we can change to what we really want in all of those different directions. And I think, I'm sorry, Ravi, that just that one paragraph you mentioned, although it's good in terms of demanding or insisting on a 5-year window when articles will become free, many publishers seem to already do that. I just think that we need to go much more beyond that and think about possibly a body like the IMU, I don't know, creating some kind of a publishing charter that we can all agree with, that we might have all our adhering organizations agree with, that we can then use as a benchmark for the various types of publication that are out there. And I'm talking about something that is community-driven rather than a top-down approach. And obviously many of the non-profit organizations like societies would automatically be in some sense at the ground level of such an exercise. But there's something that I think we need to do. We need to take the reins in our hand and decide which direction the horse should go.
Thank you. Ravi, do you want to add a comment?
I just want to say the IMU does have did do this and has best practices, but it should be said that even the national societies don't necessarily follow best practices.
Yeah, I mean, obviously from my point of view, it's, I think in terms of the mathematics community making itself heard, I think I have experienced that, and I think the mathematics community did a pretty good job of making itself heard at Elsevier. It's fairly regrettable that it had to come to a boycott, or it has to come to boards resigning for that to happen. I mean, that's a shame that those things have to happen. But I think you have got our attention now, and it's a matter of levels of engagement and things that we can do, and listening to your feedback. I also had a point written down about how researchers are evaluated in certain mathematics in particular, and how I've encountered quite a lot of people who are quite frustrated about it in many ways. And I think so what Nalini has said about you have to take control of it, and you have to convince those people who evaluate you that they're not going about it the right way, if that's what you believe. Then you have to convince those people that they want to do things in a different way. I mean, all the research councils and all the research bodies that evaluate researchers every 3, 4, 5 years, however long it is. And the list in Australia that was mentioned earlier, I know the mathematics people did a really good job of it, but that list didn't survive because several other disciplines didn't do as good a job. I know that there was some nursing journals that got very badly rated, and that was one of the reasons it ended up not surviving, as far as I know. So, I mean, we are trying to listen to the community now. We took the decision to, one of our journals got closed last year because it wasn't very good quality, and the community told us it wasn't very good quality, so we closed that journal. We have our Mathematics Council now that we talk to on a regular basis. It's members of the community, and they tell us what's happening in the community, give us ideas and give us feedback. I mean, in terms of the politics, that's something that's slightly removed from my remit, so I won't particularly comment on it. But I think that it is up to you as a field, as a group, to kind of work out what you want your destiny to be and how you want to define it, and we'll do our best to help you if we can.
Thank you.
I'll make a couple of quick points. So it's my impression that before 1950, most of the publishing was being done by universities, societies, academies, etc., with a few exceptions. Those were sort of considered altruistic publishers. There was a spurt in the 60s because research activity expanded. And I'm curious, why could the societies, universities not expand their publishing program at that time? It's at that time that many journals started. For example, Academic Press, Journal of Algebra, Journal of Functional Analysis. If you look at the first volume, it's about 1960s. So was it lack of resources? Was it lack of administrative structures? Or was it also closed mind towards some subjects? I think publishers moved in when the societies didn't realize there were people working in some areas like combinatorics, probability, computation. They were perhaps neglected by the societies, and that's where publishers moved in. And some societies like the SIAM, for example. So here it will be instructive to relate a small anecdote. This is a true story. Two of my friends were working on something, and I was sitting next to them in the coffee house almost every day. I heard them talk for 6 months about projective modules. Then one day they were very happy and said they've solved the problem. Now they're going to write the paper. 2 months later, when I saw the paper, the title had in it vector bundles. No mention of projective modules. I was curious. I asked them what happened. I never heard you talk of vector bundles. The answer was that they want to submit the paper to Annals of Mathematics. Projective modules and vector bundles mean the same thing, but the chance of being accepted in the Annals is if the title has vector bundles. Now there are lessons in this for the past, for present, for future. So that's one small thing I want to say. I also want to tell you a good story which is sort of not working out as it should have. The Indian Academy of Sciences publishes about 10 journals in various subjects. Mathematics is one of them. About 10 years ago, they successfully made an agreement with a big publisher. I cannot name the publisher because it's supposed to be confidential. Now here are the terms they successfully got from the publisher. The editorial control will remain with the Academy. The copyright will remain with the Academy. The Academy will provide free access to all the publications on its website. The publisher is free to charge for it, which they did. And on the printed copies, it will be joint in print. It seems to have worked from our perspective very well for first 5 years and renewed by another 5 years. The Academy got a lot of income from this. It's nearly of the order, 1/4 of their total income. So we thought it was very successful, but when it's being renegotiated now, the publisher wants to change many of the terms, and it's not clear where the negotiation will go. So now others are doing the same thing, Acta Mathematica. So the prestige has been built up by the work of editors and authors. So Acta Mathematica, publications of the IHES, they have also been given to a publisher.
No, it's not. No, they're just distributed by publisher.
Only distributed?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. So here also, as I said, the same thing. The Academy also is publishing, but it's being commercially distributed by the publisher. So could we have some discussions in forums like this in the IMU elsewhere so that we strike a common deal or common kind of deal with the publisher so that everybody knows what everybody else is doing and get. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have not much time because I promised that to be finished at the latest a quarter before 8. So it is only 3 minutes, but maybe we have some questions coming up. Are you really exhausted? Yeah, please.
Rich Ravi from Wayne State in Detroit. one of the issues that one should consider perhaps is the following. And it may be part of the, well, of course, part of the motivation for open access journals popping up is that people want to make money. But besides that, there is the issue of rapid publication versus months and months and months waiting for a referee's report. And if we could, as part of these best practices descriptions, which I've read but I don't remember, include some requirements that journals give responses in a reasonable time, that might mitigate some of the pressure to get people to pay money and get their stuff out, because we're not like the biologists, we don't need to be published by tomorrow.
Thank you. More comments? Ravi, please.
So quick response, as our follow-up comment, which is, in this case, the reason for delays are often, you know, as an editor, it's the referee, it's us.
Yeah.
We're the ones. So how do you make your, I would love to have a way of making my referees respond faster. If you've got a way, that's great. I just want to see.
Yeah. Okay, the final question, please.
Very quickly,
Could you get the microphone?
any journal that
Please,
guarantees...
wait. Introduce yourself.
Chuck Well, New Jersey. Any journal that guarantees that they can get a paper published in 3 months or less, I don't trust the quality of the referee. Second thing is that we need to move more towards rejecting quickly the papers that should be rejected, so that the papers which we will accept, if thoroughly vetted, but the papers which we will not accept, move on quickly.
Well, if you allow me a comment, because I've been editor-in-chief of a journal for some time, is actually the very difficult situation is, of course, you do reject very quickly papers, sometimes making mistakes, but the worst, of course, when you think a paper is interesting and you have it referees and you suffer to get good referees, and in the end you finally don't accept it because somebody points that there is really some weakness, that's of course extremely embarrassing because you have kept people waiting, but you kept people waiting because the paper was good enough that you looked at it very seriously. And of course, if you want somebody to check a paper, in particular if the paper is a serious paper, thoroughly, it takes time and a lot of energy. So you're absolutely right, it's difficult. So thank you very much for your patience, and I'm sorry for having arrived late, which has shifted a little bit the discussion. I hope you get some new information, some new perspectives, maybe some new ideas for action, for maybe coming up with either new models or new ways of getting people working together. I thank very much the panelists for their contributions. I hope my forcing them to get into a definite scheme has not been too painful. And I wish you a very good evening and a very good conference. Thank you very much.